Great. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Yeah, so this, a lot of you have named most of the animals on here, the raccoons, the turkeys, deer, cows, which are not native to this area, and they're going to be a big highlight of this presentation. Great horned owl, and the western pond turtle, which is native to this area, is also found at Helen Putnam. All right, so I'd like to welcome you to our second webinar of our series, Story of the Land. Let's see. Here we go. So second series of Stories of the Land. So Stories of the Land, this program series really explores regional parks past and present, and we kind of discuss and look at the different political, natural, geographical, and cultural influences that have shaped the landscape of your parks and surrounding areas of the parks. So that's kind of our theme throughout the presentation today. I'm going to give a little introduction of our agenda of what we're going to be discussing during this presentation. We're going to be looking at Helen Putnam. I'll give you some facts about this park. Take a moment on behalf of Sonoma County Regional Parks and myself to honor the past, present, and future indigenous communities of this area. A brief overview of Alta California, the overlapping cultures in Rancho Petaluma, and Petaluma's deep ranching roots, and we'll go ahead and end on a conclusion. We'll have a wrap-up. Quickly, before I get on to the next slide, Sandy is my colleague. Can you say hi, Sandy? She'll be monitoring the chat room for me. Thanks. And so if you have any questions, we'll stop at the middle of the presentation and take some questions. And at the end, I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat box if folks want to email me. Right. Helen Putnam is one of our two most southern parks in Sonoma County Regional Park System. In addition to Tallow, this is the other park that is located in Petaluma. And as you can see, something that's really indicative and iconic of Petaluma area are those beautiful rolling hills. And in this image, you can see some areas that are wooded and then some areas that are not wooded. And a very endemic tree this area are oak trees. There are a lot of oak trees, and I'll be talking more about these trees. And as many know from history or just from living in this area, oak trees seeds are acorns, which is a very common staple among our indigenous communities. So Helen Putnam is about approximately 6 miles of trail, and there is a group picnic area there is a playground, and it has great views. On a clay, you can see the Bay Bridge. I'm going to ask you, and you can go ahead and put it in the chat box, who Helen Putnam Regional Park named after. And you just put A, B, C, or D. Was it a pioneer woman in Petaluma, the first female mayor of Petaluma, Little on the Prairie character, or is it named after Regional Park's first director's daughter? Go ahead and in the chat box if you want to put A, B, C, D. The response from Margaret Boger, C, Little House on the Prairie character. And B, yes, correct. It is named after the first female mayor of Petaluma. She was really well renowned in the community. She was a school teacher. She advocated for a lot of policies, and she was Petaluma's first female mayor. And the park was acquired in 1978, and it officially became a park in 1979. And it was originally named West Petaluma Regional Park, but in 1984, we changed the name to Helen Putnam Regional Park in honor of this amazing woman. So in the chat box, if you could put in, like if you've hiked at Helen Putnam Regional Park, how many of you have been there before? If you have little toddlers, maybe you like to take them out to the playground here. Helen Putnam is a really great park for hiking. It's got some really steep hills. I'd like to kindly remind everybody to please put your mic on mute. Thank you. There's a lot of really steep hills, so if you want a good workout, this is a great park. So has anybody gone there to hike or fish, picnic? Okay, hike, awesome, jogging, yeah. So I see a lot of bikers too. People bike in from Chiller Road and then get into Helen Putnam. All right. As a very common tree in Helen Putnam is oak trees. And acorns were a big staple for the indigenous communities of this area. And this particular park was in Coast Miwok territory, and this is a map giving you an idea of various indigenous communities throughout Sonoma County. And Coast Miwok territory kind of went all the way up almost to the Ocean River and all the way down to southern Marin. And this included Bodega Bay, with what is now Point Reyes National Park. So all of this is Coast Miwok territory. So the community is still very much alive and thriving, and again, on behalf of Sonoma County Regional Parks and myself, we would like to honor the past, present, and future generations of Coast Miwok and various indigenous communities of this area. Right, so Alta California. The old map of this was a part of Mexico, so this is an old map kind of outlining right here this red line of Mexico. This was all Mexican territory. Before it was Mexico, it was New Spain. It was part of the Spanish Empire. And as you can see, Baja California and now California was all part of this empire. And Alta California literally translates into High California in Spanish. And from our history lessons or from 4th grade, you remember missions. So a large component of why the Spanish were in this area was there's 21 different missions throughout California, starting in southern San Diego. They ended up having one mission all the way up here in the small town of Sonoma, which many of you have been there or familiar with. There's the State Historic Park, Barracks, and Mission San Francisco Solano. And General was in charge of the mission and pretty much all of Alta California. And this is his wife, Francisca Chacarrillo de Vallejo. And both of these individuals have cities named after them here in California, the city of Vallejo and the city of Benicia. So was in charge of what was then Rancho Petaluma. So huge ranch. And those hills that we saw with no trees on them was pretty much grazing land. And he had over 50,000 heads of cattle, and he had over 24,000 sheep. And so those animals were brought here by the Spanish and brought up in here. He also had wheat and grain planted. It was agricultural area in Rancho Petaluma. Still pretty much the case of Petaluma. This is an old image of old Adobe, which is still in Petaluma. Some of you may have been there. It's now a California State Historic Park. And this is an area where we're going to spend a little bit of time on. This is where Rancho Vallejo had his big house. It was really one of the biggest houses in Alta California and what is now this area, Sonoma County, Northern California. And he had a blacksmith shop here, and he ran a tallow and hide business. And then the business now, that's kind of what the tallow and hide business was for the Spanish. So this kind of more of a modern day look of what this area looks like. The workforce here was Native Americans. The Native Americans were pushed off their land not only by the Spanish, but later on by the English settlers, but by the Spanish, and they were displaced. And so a lot of them were forced into labor in this area. So a lot of them were working here at the old Adobe. And just some images of the tallow and hide industry. It was really popular. So I mentioned before, Alta California, which is now California, was part of the Spanish Empire. And at that time, King Charles III did not allow trade to go beyond the Spanish Empire. However, when New Spain became Mexico, they decided to spread their trade outside of the Spanish Empire and were trading as far as Boston. So a lot of leather was being shipped to Boston. Very popular for shoes and other clothes, all kinds of things. And another thing that really started booming was the Vaquero culture. Spanish word for cowboy. And obviously, having all those cattle and you need all this labor force, General Vallejo had a lot of cowboys managing his cattle. And this is kind of, I'm going to get into a component of the presentation talking about the overlapping of cultures. So when Spanish were coming up here in the 1700s, they arrived at what is now San Francisco Presidio. There was already a mix of cultures, the mestizos, was indigenous people who had children with the Spanish, and their children was with what we call ethnogenesis, which means a new culture, is mestizos. So had them coming up here, and so when people came from different areas, they also brought with them their traditions, their customs, and things, tangible things that they used. And Spanish brought with them the cows and this vaquero culture. It started overlapping with a lot of the indigenous community here. So, and they each traded something else that they traded was knowledge. For example, this plant right here is soaproot, which was used by Native Americans as soap, but also as a medicinal plant for poison oak. And the bulb, which is down here, this image, if you heat up like this, the Spanish were using it to stuff their mattresses to make them softer. And here we have an 1800s style saddle, and a lot of Native Americans became really artisans, leather artisans in making sandals, belts, saddles for the Spanish. And because the tallow hide was so big, this is an image of tallow candles. And does anybody know what tallow is? I forgot to mention that, but I'll ask if you want to put it in the chat box. It's fat, and it was used also to make soap. And to this day, some people still make soap out of tallow. So there wasn't any electricity then. This was a very high commodity, as having candles. Also, whale blubber was used as oil. So the main used for lighting. And also, Native Americans became really good vaqueros, also learning how to ride horses and learning how to graze cattle themselves. By the time that Mexico and the United States went to war and the United States won, a lot of people were to work on land also, and also became cowboys and learning how to graze and man cattle. Vallejo ended up selling a lot of his land. I'll get more into that later on in the presentation. He had a lot of his land in Petaluma to people coming in from the east. So, from the east is General Fremont, and I'm going to talk about General Fremont and his ruffians. So, California was not part of the United States. It was still part of Mexico. And Fremont and these other militants wanted to take California, and what they did is they had what we call the Bear Flag Rebellion. It was led by Ide and Merritt, who were two political generals in American. Well, they kind of had their own militia. They didn't get the tweet that the United States had already declared war on Mexico. So in July of 1846, they came to Sonoma and they bombarded the town, and they went straight to Vallejo's house, and they were going to kidnap him. But they'll talk them into coming in to have a drink and talk about, like, what are they trying to do? Because little did they know that Vallejo was pro-California being annexed by the United States. But they didn't care that he was trying to be formal and polite. They still kidnapped him, and they didn't hurt him or anything. They ended up letting him go back home. And then shortly after, they got word that the United States had declared war on California, and California became part of the United States. So then I'm going to pause here and ask a question. So into different times, this is kind of the mid to late 1800s image, is 1850s image area in Sonoma County. And if you could please put in the chat box, what does this look like? What part of Sonoma County would you guess this is part of? Again, you could click the chat box at the top of the right, and then you will see it on the lower left if you put in an answer. Big Bay, one guess. Petaluma. Yeah. Michael, yeah, Petaluma. I see people coming in. Yeah, this is West Petaluma, and this image right up here in the corner is the Washoe House. I'm sorry I couldn't blow it up, make it bigger. But this is kind of known as like a corner area where people traveling from Petaluma to Santa Rosa, or people from Vega Bay coming into Petaluma, this is where they would stop. It was an old hotel. And in this area was also this kind of agriculture shop. They sold farming tools. Stopping here, but this is West Petaluma, where Stony Point is. This is what it would look like. And as you can see, there's hardly any trees. It looks like a farmland. So basically, this, when I look at this, it looks very much like Petaluma with those rolling hills and this farmland area. So that kind of like helps us lead into deep ranching route. So even from the late 1700s, early 1800s, there's been cattle grazing happening in Petaluma. And to this day, this image is Strauss. It's a dairy farm in Petaluma. We might see their products at the grocery store. It's still in Petaluma, and it's still thriving. We also have beef farms in Petaluma. It's what's for dinner. So these are still, Petaluma farmers are known for having grass-fed beef. So still a lot of cattle being and happening in Petaluma, even from back when Vaqueros was in this area. So you're asking yourself, what does this have to do with Helen Putnam Regional Park? Well, if you've ever been to Helen Putnam Regional Park, you have passed this pond. And sometimes when we're in parks, you see little indicators that show like clues of the history of this area. This is a man-made pond, and the majority of the time you see a man-made pond is because they're watering different animals. And Helen Putnam Regional Park used to be a cattle ranch. And if you've been there, you'll see on this trail up here, there is a ranch, a cattle ranch, and it's adjacent to Helen Putnam Regional Park. It is owned by the Vaqueros, definitely, and they sold us this property and still own that ranch, which is adjacent. So hence the cattle that you'll see hanging out over here is still a cattle ranch. And it's still something that Sonoma County Regional Parks is doing at parks. And this is an image at Putnam where we brought in some sheep to graze. And we have our natural resource team. And what we're trying to do is make the trampling that once took place to help native grasses thrive by ungulates. Prior to the gold rush and to the colonization of California, there was elk found in this area, in Petaluma area. This pronghorn was also known to be in Petaluma marsh areas. So these are both ungulates, and ungulates are animals that have hooves. And the native grasses had adapted to the trampling of these animals, and it would help spread their seed. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. If there's questions, feel free to put it in our chat box. And I just would like to invite you that when you are out in our parks to take a moment and think about the different clues that you see on the trail that kind of help tell the story of the park and the surrounding landscape. Every place has a story to tell. Every place has a story to tell. And Sonoma County, there's a lot of stories to tell, but we just don't see them. They're kind of implicit or hidden within the landscape. And regional parks interpretive and educational programs are supported by the nonprofit Sonoma County Regional Parks Foundation. If you enjoyed this program or you love our parks, we invite you to support at SonomaCountyParksFoundation.org. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat box, and I am going to put my email in the chat box if anybody has any questions that they would like to send me.
A couple of comments, just folks mentioning it's pretty interesting that we had elk and pronghorn and antelope around.
And also the Laguna de Santa Rosa is another area where there was a lot of ungulates all throughout pretty much Sonoma County, and bears were more prevalent. I talk about this in presentation, but the Spanish went to bullfighting, and what they really got into was fighting bears and bulls and having a big part around that. So that's another presentation if people are interested. But yeah, so there's a lot of stories around here, including a different natural history. I'd like to thank everybody again for taking the time to join us for this presentation. Feel free to check out our website, sonomacountyparks.org, for other webinars happening. And if you have any questions, again, my email is in the chat